we think?
Do you need this one now?
Oh, good. Okay. Do you want to talk at the beginning at all? Don't let him leave. What's the deal with this?
Oh yeah. You can. I mean, you can use VPN. Like you can connect into.
If you need
When they want to connect, you can send
she's over there. So
Okay.
I'm
Thanks.
just right through this door.
Okay, perfect. Warn me before when you're ready.
Do you need to test?
No, I'm good.
It should work. Yes. Sorry, it didn't work out.
All right.
Well, there's a ton of chairs here, that's for sure. And there's a table in the back. I've turned it
Okay,
down.
thank you.
Oh, that one, look on the top, turn that button. Slides, does it slide that way? That's a good thing to think about. I had to do that. I've had that happen many times. I'm like, oh, what is that sound? They're in the back.
started. It's a few minutes after 9. I think everybody's come in that's trickling around in the hall. I wanted to thank you guys for coming today. It's been a long time since I've seen a lot of you. I see a lot of new faces. I'm Erin Williams, the Agency Services Supervisor for the HR Division. We have Cherie Doak with us today. She's going to talk to us about the new federal overtime rule. Goes into effect December 1st. So Cherie's going to give us a little overview of the changes and what that's going to cause for us here in the agencies in the state of Wyoming. And then Lori will talk to us a little bit at the end about our plan for meeting with agencies and working on your specific exemptions. Thanks again.
Thanks, Erin, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in today. As Erin said, I'm going to talk about the new final federal rule on overtime and the base pay rate adjustment that goes into effect December 1st. Okay, it gives us a little bit of time to prepare for it, to strategize. Can you guys hear me through the speakers okay? Am I coming through? Okay, good.
I don't think you get much volume over there, but I think you guys can hear it, can't you?
Can you hear me? Sorry, we have had 99 IT problems this morning, of course, and it's just been a clown show. But
Just keep going, I'll turn it up.
all right, thanks, Matt. Matt has been great, everybody. Let's hear it for Matt. He does a great job. So before we get into the meat of the federal overtime rule, I want to go through with you just a little story about a gal who was directly impacted by the change. Single mom Elizabeth Paredes is the assistant manager of a sandwich shop in Tucson, Arizona. She's paid a flat salary of $24,000 a year. While she routinely puts in 50 more hours each week, she doesn't earn a dime of overtime. Oh, I'm missing some words. What has happened? I'm missing some words. Anyway, well, now I'm going to have to tell you Elizabeth's story from memory. Anyway, she doesn't earn a dime of overtime. That's the moral of the story. But with the final rule that goes into effect, her salary will now either need to be adjusted up to the base pay rate of $913 a week, or she will be eligible for overtime for a minimum of those 10 hours that she works every week in addition to the 40. Matt, might we close this door? I wonder. Thanks, Lori. Just a little background noise out there. Anyway, the Fair Labor Standards Act was put into effect to ensure that workers in America received a fair wage for a fair day's work. Okay, this meant that anybody who was working 8 hours a day got their regular salary, and if they worked over 8 hours in a day, they were paid overtime for those hours. These were managers, people in charge of large responsibilities in terms of opening the store, handling money, making decisions about other employees. And the Fair Labor Standards Act was put into effect so that they could get equal pay for the job that they did, meaning that they could, in the hopes that they could raise a family, own a home, put money towards a nest egg, just like everybody wants to do. They wanted to live the American dream, okay? Those types of jobs were middle-class jobs by design. The blueprint of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which gave most Americans the right to minimum wage and time and a half pay when they worked over 40, it was the crown jewel of worker protection and helped build the middle class in America. But because of the erosion of the salary threshold for overtime and the concerted policy choices made by previous administrations that just didn't keep up to par, they didn't intentionally neglect workers, there were just other priorities at the time. That crown jewel has lost its luster. So the DOL is taking the action on behalf of the working people, like you and me and Elizabeth Paredes, so that 4.2 million workers who were not previously eligible for overtime pay can in fact now earn time and a half when they work over 40 hours in a week, or are they eligible for it at least. I just wanted to show you this. The numbers are a little hard to read, but nationwide we're looking at 4.2 million workers. In Wyoming, that's 7,000 workers. In Texas, that's 370,000 workers. California, 392,000 workers. Florida, 331,000 workers, and so on and so on. And even though those numbers in those larger states are a lot bigger, the percentages are almost exactly the same. So even though you've got only 7,000 workers in Wyoming that are affected, that's still almost 13%, between 13 and 26%. I know that's a big gap, but there's some margin of error in there, but that's what it is nationwide. So 4.2 million workers directly affected by the change based on their salaries. These workers are currently ineligible for overtime. The Department of Labor estimates that most of them, 4.1 million, will become eligible for overtime when they work more than 40 hours. So they'll now be converted to overtime eligible status, while others, only 100,000 of them, will receive a raise so that the salary is above the new threshold. The impacts of the rule. Most of the workers affected by the standard salary levels. So that just means they don't yet make enough money and they'll have to be raised up. So most of those are because of their salary. However, 65,000 of that 4.2 million will be affected due to the highly compensated level increase. And of those 65,000, 64,000 of them will become newly eligible for overtime. So the highly compensated currently is $126,000 a year, and it's going to be raised. We'll get to those numbers in a minute. I don't want to misquote it. But 64,000 of them will become eligible for overtime, those highly compensated employees. 1,000 of them will remain for the exemptions for executive, administrative, or professional employees. Over the last 40 years, the percent of salaried workers entitled to overtime pay has diminished considerably. In 1972, the last time there was a significant raise to the threshold, 62% of American workers were eligible for overtime. Currently, only 7% of American workers, that's all American workers, that's you, me, that's the governor's cabinet, that's highly compensated oil corporation employees. The new threshold will bring up 35% of the American workers to a livable wage. In looking at some of the breakdown of some of the numbers, currently 22,514,000 American workers are exempt from overtime. Of those, 9 million of them are women, almost 13.5 of them are men. 4.2 million will gain protections, and 2.3 million of those people are female. So that's 26% going to be raised up. 1.8 of those workers are male. The breakdown by education, you can see all that, and that's in the email that was set out and linked, in the link that was emailed to everybody. So even educated individuals are going to receive a jump up. Under age 35, 5.6 million of those employees are currently not eligible for overtime. 1.6 of them will jump up. Under age 25, 314,000. 35 and over, 2.5, almost 2.6 million. Okay, so this is everyday worker. This isn't just college kids. This isn't just people working in fast food. This is everybody. Everybody's going to be affected. Age 55 and over, 743,000. Age 35 to 54, we're still looking at 1.8 million people who will gain the protections with the new overtime rule. And then there's some demographic breakdown by race, and then family and children. And this is what's important to remember, is that because so many of those workers affected are women, and about 26% of those women affected are single mothers, there's a direct effect on the children in America. Okay, that's more food in the mouths of children in America. I know I'll move on from my bleeding heart, but I think it's important to bear in mind that this is a good thing for the American family. So the rule changes in a nutshell. We're going to see a salary level increase from $455 a week to $913 a week. Non-discretionary bonuses can now be included up to 10% of an employee's pay. And there will be automatic updates. So every 3 years, we're going to see an update to the rule that adjusts the salary level to stay in keeping with cost of living. And everybody, employers, government schools, everybody's going to get 6 months heads up, about 150 days heads up that they'll get. So just under 6 months notice of when the new change will go into effect. So the new overtime rule. Currently, anybody making $455 a week or more is not eligible for overtime. I mean, that's just not very much money. That's not even $1,000 or $2,000 a month. Effective December 1st, the salary rate increases to $913 a week. The highly compensated employees, and we do have some of these in state government, most of them are going to be exempt because of their duties, but it's important to bear in mind that there is going to be a change. Oh, it's currently $100,000, is that right, Lori? $100,000 will jump up on December 1st to $134,004 per year. The non-discretionary bonuses. These bonuses and incentive payments, including commissions, are forms of compensation promised in advance to employees, okay? For example, bonuses for meeting production goals, retention bonuses, commission payments based on a fixed formula. Okay, as long as there's no employer discretion involved in that bonus, they can be counted up to 10% of the salary to make up to the $913 a week. But no less than 90% of it must be paid out on a weekly basis or per pay period, okay? You can't make it up at the end. They've got to be getting that on a regular pay period basis. Those payments that are make-up payments or discretionary payments, discretionary bonus payments, must be paid out on a quarterly or more frequent basis, and they apply to the previous quarter. So they can't be counted in the quarter they're received. The new overtime rule allows for catch-up payments still. If an employee does not earn enough from a non-discretionary bonus, commission, or incentive payment given in a quarter to meet the standard salary level, a catch-up payment can be made within one pay period after the end of the quarter, okay? One-time catch-up payment for each quarter that just occurred. Any catch-up payment will only count toward the prior quarter salary and not toward the salary amount in the quarter in which it is paid or any subsequent quarters. Highly compensated employees. Those HCEs must continue to receive at least the full standard salary amount each pay period on a salary or fee basis without regard to the payment of non-discretionary bonuses and incentive payments. Okay, there's no change to this principle. Non-discretionary bonuses and incentive payments may be counted toward the highly compensated employee's total annual compensation requirement. Again, no change here. This is just as it was, as it's been since 1972. The highly compensated employee does not allow employers, does not allow employers to credit non-discretionary bonuses or incentive payments towards the standard salary level weekly requirement. Okay, so on a weekly basis, they still have to earn at least 90% of that HCE amount. Automatic updates. Okay, this is a big deal. This is something that we've seen the USDOL try to get passed and try to get approved in the past and try to get pushed through. This is the first time they've ever been really successful at it, so that they've attached a 3-year automatic renewal to the salary test. So every 3 years, beginning in January 1st of 2020, the standard salary and annual compensation levels will be automatically adjusted and updated. So the rule says that at least 150 days before the effective date, so we're looking at probably July or August of 2019, employers, state agencies will get an update that tells them what the new salary level is going to be. They'll publish a notice in the Federal Register. There'll be updates sent out. The website, thanks to social media and the internet, things can get out fairly quickly and fairly widespread. They'll receive notice of the updated salary and total annual compensation amounts that will be required, so they get some time to plan how to adjust, how they're going to strategize meeting those new salary requirements on their existing payroll. Some key provisions of the final rule to bear in mind, okay? It sets the standard salary level at the 40th percentile of earnings of the full-time salaried workers in the lowest wage census region of the United States. That's currently the South. The region that will continue to be used for the automatic updates unless it is no longer the lowest region. Okay, so the updates will be attached to the wage census for whatever region is the lowest paid in the country. So only 40% of the area in the country that makes the lowest wages. The USDOL is going to do automatic updates to make sure that the rest of America is paid at least the same amount as the lowest paid workers in America. Okay. It also sets the total annual compensation requirement for highly compensated employees subject to a minimal duties test. Don't forget the duties test. We've always got to apply that to the annual equivalent of the 90th percentile of full-time salaried workers nationally. So $134,004 is right at about the 90th percentile for what workers in America make right now, the highest paid. Establishes a mechanism for automatically updating the salary and compensation levels every 3 years to maintain those levels at and above percentiles and to ensure that they continue to provide useful and effective tests for the exemption. So every 3 years, not only is the USDOL going to update the salary level, but they're going to review the tests to determine if they are in keeping with what most managers, executives, and professionals have in their litany and in their toolbox in terms of their job duties, okay? Under the final rule, the eligibility for overtime will become clearer because the salaries will fall below the new threshold and no assessment of their duties will be necessary, okay? So anybody making less than $913 a week, no matter what they do, will have to be paid overtime, no matter what their duties. They're a manager, an executive, professional, executive assistant, all of those now have to be paid, no matter what their duties are. Of the 5.7 million white-collar workers, approximately, and that's nationwide, there's about 5.7 million white-collar workers in America right now. 732,000 of them are overtime eligible, but don't receive overtime because they have not been recognized as their employer as such. So the employers don't pay them overtime even when they've earned it. The new federal overtime rule, the Department of Labor's final rule on defining and delimiting the exemptions for executive, administrative, and professional employees under the FLSA updates the salary level required for the white-collar exemption to ensure that the FLSA's intended protections are fully implemented and to simplify the identification of exempt employees. Okay, it should make things simpler. There's going to be a hit to the bottom line initially, but it should be much more clear after this. So the 3 tests that must be met in order to claim the white-collar exemption. Number 1, the employee must be paid on a salary basis, okay? They can't be paid hourly. And they are not subject to a reduction based on the quality or quantity of the work that they perform. Number 2, the employee's salary must meet a minimum salary level, which after the effective date of the final rule will be $913 per week, $47,476 annually. The employee's primary job duty must involve the kind of work associated with the exempt executive, administrative, or professional employee, so the standard duties test. Okay, so the salary test is first. Then you check the duties. So some strategies, and we're going to get into those next. In response to the new overtime rule, there are some things that employers can do. Just start paying time and a half. That's an easy one. Keep your current record-keeping system in place. If you think you've got employees that are now exempt, or non-exempt, excuse me, you just pay them for the overtime that they earn. Any hours they work over 40, they're owed overtime. Secondly, you can raise workers' salaries above the new threshold, and then you don't have to worry about who's working overtime and who isn't. You may limit workers' hours to 40 per week. Okay, that really is the easiest one. Or some combination of the above. okay? And we'll get into those different combos to see what might work best. And you can think about that, talk with your fiscal people and your leadership. But there are some easy fixes to this. They will cost money, but they don't have to cost a lot of money. So some of the strategies: examine the existing personnel and exempt versus non-exempt status. Okay, that's a really easy one. The first step you want to take: spreadsheet your personnel, see who's exempt, see who's not. If you've got people that are non-exempt, they're already being paid overtime. We already know what they're doing. We don't need to worry about them. It's the people that were previously exempt that we need to take a really close look at, okay? So if you've got some folks that are exempt and they're going to be non-exempt because of the salary, so that's your next fraction. You apply the new standard salary level, find out who falls out from underneath. Take those folks, you look at their duties. Can you reassign duties within that agency or within that division? Can you look at other staffing needs to see if you can't put part-time workers into place that won't so adversely affect your bottom line? Okay, there's a number of strategies, but the first thing you want to do is really pull out and look at who's exempt and who isn't. Okay, that's your first step. Put the non-exempt employees to one side. We're not worried about them. They're going to continue to get overtime. Okay. So then for those that are currently exempt, how many of them are currently working over 40 hours a week? And that's where the record keeping is going to come into play, okay? Most of the time, our exempt employees don't have to submit a timesheet, except to get paid, but they don't have to keep a daily record of their time, except for under state government, right? The new change, which actually was prescient, how do you say that word? Where they saw the future. So look at how often those employees are working over 40 hours a week. If it's only in spike seasons, tax time, end of the fiscal year, that's a manageable amount of overtime, okay? How much and how often? What's the cause? Can those hours be realistically capped? So if you've got somebody that's consistently working over 40 hours, can you cap them at 45 hours a week? That will help limit your amount of overtime liability. Those are some questions that really you want to get answered initially. Does the employee meet the duties test for the exemption? Okay, that's a big one. Are they still performing exempt duties? Or has their job changed so much since they were hired into it that they no longer really even are exempt employee? Will duty reassignment jeopardize exempt status? So if you're strategizing and you're looking at reassigning duties to help minimize overtime, make sure that you're not then assigning duties to someone who was non-exempt, that suddenly they're going to be doing exempt duties. You could jeopardize their exemption. I said that wrong. You jeopardize their standing as a non-exempt employee. Does the company structure allow reassignment of duties? Okay. Sometimes they don't. Teachers, lawyers, and doctors are not affected by the new rule. Primary duties for exempt employees must be non-manual, office, managerial, or assisting management duties. Is there an existing system for tracking hours worked? Okay, so at state government, we've got that in place already. It's not the smoothest running machine I've ever encountered, but it is in place. It's already there. People know how to use it. So you can track work hours without giving up flex scheduling. You don't have to make them clock in and clock out to keep track of the hours worked, okay? The current system works just fine. They're putting in how many hours they worked that day. You don't have to have a start time and an end time to make it legal. Okay, as we've talked about before, you can cap the overtime. Just start disciplining employees if they're not supposed to work overtime and they do. Raise the salaries. Okay, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing if we could just do that for everybody? We know that's not probably the most realistic approach, but that is one solution. Okay, if you've got somebody making $700 a week, You raise them up to the 913, suddenly you don't have to worry about it anymore. Spread out the work hours among employees so that you don't have somebody that's barely working 40 and somebody that's working 50. Let's get that spread out to minimize the overtime. Or, as we stated earlier, you can just pay the overtime while keeping the salary constant for the first 40 hours. Finally, you can adjust their wage upper or lower so that the salary doesn't actually change and they still keep working the same amount of hours. And we'll get into the details of that, because we do understand that there will be a number of employers that will adjust employees' wages downward so that they are still working the same amount of regular hours, the same amount of overtime hours, but the salary that they take home doesn't change, okay? They'll adjust that hourly wage rate lower so that the overtime is manageable. They're still going to have to pay it. Obviously, we don't advocate too strongly for that, but we realize that it might be the only way for some employers to make this work and come into compliance. So, some options for responding to the change and staying compliant include raising the salaries to maintain the exemption, pay current salaries with overtime after 40 for anybody that's eligible, reorganize the workloads, adjust schedules, spread out work hours, examine staffing needs. Finally, adjust those wages. Okay, so if somebody was making $20 an hour, you adjust it downward, call it $15 an hour, pay the overtime at, what is 15? What is time and a half for 15? I don't know, 32, something like that. $32 an hour for their overtime, and the salary then doesn't change. You just, because their salary now includes a provision that gives them 5 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours of overtime on average each week. Does that make sense for the adjusting it? Okay. Just a final reminder that the U.S. Department of Labor is the enforcement entity for the overtime and the new final rule. Okay, under a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the U.S. Department of Labor, the state departments of labor have been contracted to help roll out education on this topic, answer questions, provide training, and lend assistance to employers across the nation to help minimize the pain. So you can call the US DOL at 866-487-9243 or Labor Standard 777-7261 or dol.gov for any additional questions. Wow, that only took 30 minutes. Any questions? None? No? Well, if there are no questions, we'll let Lori talk for a little bit.
This one I don't really care about. Let me grab this one. Okay. You go ahead and put that on you. Do you have anything to like this too? Or if you're not going long, I suppose. Okay. Great.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you for doing that, coming. So everything that she said, we've been working on at A&I HRD across the state. So basically what I've done is I've taken the July pay, I've calculated how many employees that are currently exempt that won't meet that salary test, and we have about 64 of them. That's not bad, statewide. Right. The one that might be a little bit more concerning is that, you know how when we did our classification study, we used the Hay method of job evaluation to evaluate all of the jobs? I looked at the evaluations and using that, and there are some positions in state government that just based off of the evaluation, the knowledge, know-how, accountability, and responsibility, there are some that are questionable that to meet those, the exemption tests, you know, the executive, the duties test. So while they might meet the salaries test, they're questionable whether they meet the, those duties tests. And there's about 551. So we need to be looking at those. We've also got some other issues. So what we're going to want the agencies to do is, even though I've done it statewide, we're going to want each of the agencies to look at their PALE, do the same thing, look at all of your positions that are exempt, non-exempt. They're non-exempt, just put them aside. It's the exempt ones that we want to make sure that we are looking at, because you know the penalties of the misclassification for those employees are huge. I know you didn't cover that, but I think
Double back pay, triple back pay if it's intentional. So if you've been to a training like this and they find a violation, triple the back.
so they're double back pay, triple back pay, basically big violations if there's a violation and the DOL comes and investigates and substantiates those violations. And they audit everybody, not just the agency that might have had the complaint. Thank you. So when you are going through your PALE and you identify your exempt positions, I'd like to have you guys identify which exemption you believe that they fall under, the executive, administrative, or the professional, or the highly compensated. We will be scheduling meetings to go over the information with your agencies between now and the end of October, and so that we can get everybody properly classified. You know, we're using this as an opportunity to review all positions in state government, not just those that fall under the salary, your salary levels. And as Cherie said, you know, there are ways that you can do is to control the overtime. That is going to be a lot more work for your supervisors, is, you know, they're going to be a little bit more hands-on, making sure that if an employee who used to be exempt is now non-exempt, but they still are going to work those overtimes, you know, they may just have to tell them to go home after 40. Obviously, we don't have to worry about the bonus thing because we don't really get bonuses here in the state, so that's not going to be an option really for us, I don't think. And as far as adjusting the salaries, you know, we're going to want to work with you guys with that as well, because even though we might be able to adjust an employee salary up to meet that threshold, we might also have other employees who are in that same classification who just are right over the threshold. They're not getting an increase. So, you know, some other issues of adjusting salaries up is the compression and what that does, you know, within our organization. The other thing is, you know, if you have part-time employees, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cherie, but if you have a part-time employee, if they are not working or making that $913 a week, regardless of their level, they would be considered non-exempt. Granted, you know, if they're part-time, they're not going to work over 40, but we would still want to make sure that that they're classified appropriately. So basically on our numbers, we have, like I said, 64 that fail a salary test, about 551 that are questionable. The other thing that I want you guys to look at is within the agencies, I've noticed a lot of classifications that are same, and you all have exempt and non-exempt for that same classification. Knowing how the Hay study and, you know, the evaluation works, you know, classification, they're all doing pretty much the same job. So from our standpoint at A&I HRD, all classifications are going to be one or the other. There might be a few exceptions that we aren't aware of. You know, maybe, you know, a position does have supervisory duties, but yet they do other, you know, so we'll work with you on those. But for the most part, we're going to make, you know, try to ensure that all classifications are classified exempt or non-exempt the same. Does that make sense? We have some management positions that are exempt that should be non-exempt, that should be exempt, but they're classified as non-exempt. we'll probably require you to change those. That's about all I have. Any questions? Yes, Sheree?
Just to clarify, that's 64 employees statewide?
Yes.
Across agencies? Okay.
That is very
Okay.
good. So those 64, we know will become non-exempt. So after we meet with you guys, between now and the end of October, we will work with getting communications that we'll want all agencies to go out to all of the employees, that have their statuses changed. We'd prefer to have that go out like November 1st or sooner. We want to give those employees at least that 30 days notice that their exemption status has changed and what that means for them. So that goes out November 1st, and then, of course, the new regulations take effect December 1st. Any questions?
Lori,
Yes.
you don't have any dates set for when you'll be getting with each agency?
Between now and middle to the end of October. So if you have if you want to meet with me specifically sooner rather than later, email me, and we'll get that scheduled. Well, we appreciate you guys coming. If you have any questions after you leave here, feel free to give Sheree a call. And you can call me as well as far as what strategies you guys might be thinking in your agencies that you want to use. Obviously, if you're going to adjust salaries up or adjust salaries down, we really want you to work with us and keep us informed of what you're doing. We'll also have to, inform budget of some of these things about what's going on, because if you're going to keep them as non-exempt and they are working overtime, we want to let budget be aware of this, because that will increase your standard budget at the end. So thank you all for coming.